Look closely. What you're seeing here is an unidentified airborne object filmed by a U.S. military drone over Syria in 2021, just released by the Pentagon. It's moving at speed. Keep looking because suddenly it accelerates and vanishes like something out of science fiction, as if it just went into warp speed. Except this isn't science fiction. It's real military footage, part of a second batch of declassified U.S. government files released by the Pentagon yesterday. 51 videos, 7 audio recordings, and previously unseen written accounts. We're going to go through what's in this release and what, if anything, it may actually prove. And we're doing that with Avi Loeb. He's an astrophysicist and professor of science at Harvard University and founder of the Galileo Project. That's Harvard's dedicated research program for detecting signs of extraterrestrial technology. Avi, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure.
So, Avi, why don't we pull up that video again? What do you make of this video of what seems to be this object going into warp speed out of nowhere? What's special about this, or why could the U.S. military not identify this object?
What is unusual about the object is that it accelerates very rapidly. Usually drones move at a relatively steady speed, and although we don't know the distance to this object and the value of the acceleration, but the fact that it's capable of moving so fast instantly makes it unusual. And it's potentially technology that could have been developed by some adversarial nations. So I would argue that if the U.S. intelligence agencies, the Pentagon, are not familiar with the kind of motion that it exhibits, that at the very least it poses a national security threat, because apparently someone else on Earth was capable of developing such an object. And this raises questions about what the U.S. intelligence knows and doesn't know.
You say someone else on Earth is capable of developing this. You specialize in, at least in theory, extraterrestrial technology. So what makes you so certain that this is not one of them?
Well, it could be, but first we have to consider the possibility that it is down to Earth, being produced by another nation. If we had the knowledge of the actual distance of the object, we could have assessed its acceleration, and then immediately we could tell whether it's human-made or not. But without that information, we have to allow for the most reasonable possibility, which is that it is human-made technology. I'm leading the Galileo project at Harvard University. We recently established an observatory in Las Vegas where one unit is on top of Sphere, an entertainment center, 100 meters in size, an amazing structure. And we have 2 other units 10 kilometers away from it. That allows us to triangulate, to look at a given object from different directions and infer its distance, velocity, and acceleration. So if we had an image of the same object from another direction, we could immediately tell whether its acceleration is unusual or not. And it could be an outlier that represents technologies beyond this Earth, in which case it would be the most important discovery ever made by humanity. But before we reach that conclusion, we need to know its actual distance.
Is there anything, I mean, you've been watching these Pentagon releases closely. Is there anything in the first batch, which came out earlier this month, or the second one that came out yesterday, that really surprised you or has made you think that this is a big discovery potentially?
Yeah, I was not familiar with all of this data, both in terms of images, videos, and documents dating all the way back to 1946. What's clear to me is that throughout the past decades, this subject was discussed extensively among military personnel, intelligence officers, as well as people in the Pentagon, and potentially also high-level officials within the US government. All of them are very serious people that often decide on matters of life and death, and we trust them, and they all seem to take it seriously. So it's definitely a serious matter. The question is, there are two possible interpretations for some of these objects, which are quite unusual. One is that there is the defense system of the U.S. is not has some holes in it because it finds objects that it cannot recognize. And the second is that we're dealing with a major scientific discovery. And why would the US government be the first one to notice it? Well, the military budget, the defense budget for 2026 in the US is close to $1 trillion, more than a third of the worldwide expenses on this matter. And so it's about 100 times more than the national science budget. And moreover, astronomers are focusing their telescopes on small portions of the sky at any given time. So if there are rare objects that appear, every now and then, and astronomers would just ignore them if they're close to Earth, whereas the US government would monitor them because of national security concerns. So the government would be the first to notice. Now, there are also reports about materials from crash sites and potentially also biological pilots that were made. These were made under testimonies to the US Congress under oath, and again, by people who used to work in government. And I don't know if there is anything behind them, whether they're real or not, but the more information we get out, the more intrigued I get. I feel like a kid in a candy store because, in science, it's all about the evidence. And if we see unusual evidence, we should pay attention to it and help government figure it out. What I don't like is the response from the mainstream of the scientific community, which is supposed to be curious, but is not. It's dismissive. It doesn't take it seriously. And, that is inappropriate, given the fact that this data was collected by reliable people.
Right, we're going to be looking at a few more of these videos. The Pentagon says it can't identify the flying objects in these dozens of videos, but at the same time saying that there's no evidence that they're extraterrestrial. You have a reputation in the scientific community for being more open to extraterrestrial interpretations than others. Other scientists say, well, this could be an unidentified drone in one case, or it could be a visual, some sort of visual effect that we haven't explained. What do you make of the Pentagon saying there's no evidence that these are extraterrestrial?
Oh, what I say is the data is not good enough. And there are two ways to approach it. One is to see all the data that the US government has, and it could include, for example, satellite data, which potentially has resolution of a few centimeters on the ground and can tell us very clearly if an object looks different from human-made technologies or moves different. We don't have access to such data because the sensors are classified. And I don't know whether it shows unusual objects. But the point is, we don't need to rely on the US government. We can simply look up for such objects. And I'm intrigued by the reports. I mean, some of the information is redacted, but also it was obtained in ways that are not scientific. And I do think it's the obligation of scientists to pay attention to anomalies, especially if they are reported by reliable authorities. Because at the very least, I would feel my time is not wasted because I'm contributing to the national defense of the US. I'm helping government figure things out. And, if I do end up getting firm evidence for an extraterrestrial origin, it would change the future of humanity. It's an amazing discovery to make because it could inspire new science, new technology. It would imply that we are probably not at the top of the food chain, cosmologically speaking, and it will have religious and philosophical implications. It's completely inappropriate for scientists to ignore these reports because if you look at the history of science, there are many incidents when the mainstream dismissed ideas that ended up being correct, including, in the case of Germany, continental drift. which was suggested, took 40 years for the mainstream community to accept this idea. It turns out to be right, and the person who suggested it passed away by the time it was accepted. And there are many such cases. And there are also cases of the mainstream of science going in the wrong direction. Most recently, the physics community was advocating for a new symmetry of nature, supersymmetry. $10 billion were invested in the Large Hadron Collider to search for this symmetry. We did not find it. So it's not as if the mainstream knows what it's talking about. And I think what we all should be is curious. You know, that's the way science makes progress, by being curious about unusual phenomena, anomalous phenomena that perhaps flag new knowledge that we currently do not possess.
Well, Avi, I'm very curious to see what you will say about this next clip that we can play. This one is said to show multiple objects in formation over water near Iran. It was filmed in 2022. We have to pay special attention to the bottom left corner of the screen. Another object enters the frame, then disappears again. This is another of these videos of objects that the US military says it cannot explain. The White House actually posted this clip on social media when the release went out. It made it one of their chosen highlights. Why do you think they picked this video?
Oh, because some of the objects are not only moving in air, they're also going into the water. And they do not seem to be slowed down as much as you expect from, you know, our own technologies. And there are claims that data collected on objects underwater indicate very large speeds, very massive objects moving. So I think this is an example of a video that they could have released, but there are many other data sets that they did not release that indicate objects moving between air and water and coming back again, and not behaving in the way that we expect. You know, water is very dense, 1,000 times denser than air, and you would expect much more drag, friction, as an object goes into water. So these are phenomena that are not easily explained. Now, of course, the data is not good enough. We know the speed of the boats in this case, so we can tell the object is fast. But I think that the intriguing fact is the way it interacts with water.
Could these objects not just be Iranian drones or drone boats or surveillance assets, even friendly assets? Wouldn't that be the easier explanation?
Yeah, they could be, but what the Pentagon is saying is that it's not familiar with those kind of objects, and what it may mean is that the US needs to update what it knows about other nations in terms of technologies. We know about the Chinese spy balloon that was shut down, and you know, that was a surprise. There must be a lot of such balloons floating around the US by adversarial nations. And so I wouldn't be surprised if this happens to be made by another nation. But and I should say there are also mundane explanations to what astronauts were reporting. For example, Buzz Aldrin reported seeing flashes. And that may be a result of Cherenkov radiation, which is emitted when a fast-moving charged particles that moves faster than light in a medium like water emits a very special type of light, blue light, called Cherenkov radiation. So his eyeballs may have detected cosmic rays when he was going to the moon. There were also photographs from the moon that show lights above the surface of the moon. I looked at those and I found that the same lights appear in parts of the film that were not exposed to the lens of the camera. So to me, that indicates, again, cosmic rays. So there are phenomena that clearly could be explained. There are also snowflakes reported by astronauts. One of them that are as a result of frost from the cooling system of the capsule that he was in. So there are conventional explanations, but even if 1 in a million objects that we look at is not from this Earth, that would be the biggest discovery ever made by humanity.
Let's look at one another video I want to show of an object that very clearly seems to be of this Earth. It actually looks a lot like a balloon. This was shot over Lake Huron in 2023. It shows a U.S. fighter fighter jet shooting down something that, like I say, looks a lot like a balloon. And we know it was shot down in 2023, right after the case of the Chinese spy balloon. President Biden ordered this object to be shot down. I'm wondering, is there some great mystery here, or more than meets the eye to you?
No, I think this is a very simple case. There is nothing mysterious about it. I mean, they could have collected the parts of the balloon. I wonder why they would release it. I mean, it was shut down, just like the data that we had about the Chinese spy balloon. I think this one was actually this was an object that was a balloon that was launched by citizens rather than the Chinese, and it's really nothing. There is nothing mysterious about it. So obviously, what they released is a mixed bag, and they don't give us the interpretation of each object. And many of these objects are indeed simple to understand. So we shouldn't get excited about each and every video. But all in all, there are lots of interesting documents. There is a report about a high-level security person that went on a helicopter mission to figure out an unidentified object. And they saw an object that behaves in really strange ways, splitting into two, and then I should say also that clusters of objects could be drones, because we know that there are swarms of drones that were used, for example, by the Iranians last year. And so, at the very least, some of these objects are definitely related to human-made activities, but it's not clear that all of them, because we don't have enough information.
You talk about accounts by people. It's not just videos that have been released. One document that got a lot of attention yesterday was not a video at all. It was a written account from a senior U.S. intelligence officer. It's someone who's still serving, still has full clearances. It's not a whistleblower or anyone like that. Describing that helicopter mission, this is maybe what you were referring to. He wrote, "In the distance, we saw countless orange orbs swarming in all directions against the backdrop of the mountain. The display lasted several minutes before fading. We were virtually speechless after these observations." What do you make of this account?
Well, here I would say a swarm of orbs might be just a swarm of drones. And we all know the Chinese are making beautiful displays of thousands of drones moving together. It's not just them. The US also has that. So collective motions of a lot of objects could definitely be drones. In order for an object to be unusual or an outlier, we need to have an assessment of its speed being beyond the performance envelope of human-made technologies. And that data we don't have in these cases.
There's another aspect I want to bring up here, which is that most of these cases that are released cluster around certain regions. We can actually look on a map at where in the world these cases come from that were released by the Pentagon. You can see by far the largest cluster comes from the Middle East, from Iraq, Iran, Syria, the UAE, the Persian Gulf. Is there an explanation for this geographic concentration?
Yeah, there is a very simple explanation. The more sensors and eyes you have on the sky, the more likely you are to find something that you don't explain. So, for example, in the Middle East, obviously the region is full of conflicts. We see a lot of regions close to Iran, for example, where there was a war just recently. But in addition, those regions where there are lots of sensors looking at the sky, those regions are also regions where you would expect military equipment being deployed. And so that's another source for such unusual objects. In science, there is often a misconception that all you need to do in science is find a signal. That's not true. What you need is to demonstrate that the signal is statistically significant relative to the noise. And in any war zone, there is a lot of noise, meaning objects that are being deployed for military purposes. And if you do see a signal of some unusual objects in a war zone, most likely it involves objects that you are not familiar with being deployed by adversarial nations, by other nations. And so that obviously is the task of the intelligence agencies to figure out what these are. And what the intelligence agencies and the Pentagon are telling us is that they're not doing their job. Because if they knew what these objects are, which is their job, they wouldn't tell us about them. They would immediately identify them. They would not be unidentified anomalous phenomena. So I would argue that these concentrations in regions of conflict imply that the US has some holes in its intelligence and therefore cannot identify such objects. Other, of course, believers in UFOs, UAPs, they would argue, these aliens are interested in those regions because they're trying to save us from ourselves, or they want to monitor what's happening. I don't think that's likely. I think it's most likely related to human-made devices, which obviously not everyone knows about. And also, there are many more sensors looking at the sky there so that we can see them.
I just want to pick up on something you said. You said UAP. This is the term also used by the Pentagon. They don't talk about UFOs, the term that I grew up hearing. UAP stands for unidentified anomalous phenomena. Is there a difference between UFOs and UAP?
No. Well, when you say phenomena instead of objects, you call both of them unidentified or anomalous. The definition of objects is more general because it can be objects that go into the water, in the ocean, not just in air. Originally, these were classified as unidentified aerial objects, and that was the idea of a UFO. And then also the subject got a stigma of not being a serious matter. People ignored it with ridicule. And now, 5 years ago, they wanted to bring some more respect to the discussion by calling it UAP and also extending the unidentified objects beyond the aerial objects, also to objects that go into water and maybe space as well. And so all together, we're talking about unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAP, which is the more general term. But, the substance didn't change.
Now, the Pentagon says it's releasing all of these and that this is not the last batch. They're going to continue releasing more batches. And they say they're doing it because, and I'm going to quote President Trump directly here, that people should be able to decide for themselves what the hell is going on. Is that how scientific transparency is supposed to work?
Well, it's good to see these things, but they are not. The data is not of scientific quality so far. I mean, they may have scientific quality data, for example, from satellites where you can get very high resolution images and monitor how an object moves relative to the patterns on the ground, but they haven't released that. So for me, it's more of encouragement to follow on these reports with scientific work the way I'm doing in the Galileo project. And, presumably if the objects existed for decades, they exist also now. And so we can actually find them. I'm much more in favor of the future than the past because we cannot go back in time. And the best is yet to come. If we detect any of these objects with the Galileo observatories that I'm currently operating, then we would have much more information and it will be shared with the public because our sensors are not classified. So I think the way to clear it up is to invest in research rather than going back in time. I think the government needs also to invest in using better equipment, higher quality data, evidence. Maybe they have some materials in that case, I can easily bring it to the laboratory of the Galileo project where we can assess if it came from outside the solar system. We did that for an interstellar meteor that crashed in 2014. I went on an expedition. We retrieved some materials from the bottom of the ocean close to Papua New Guinea, and we analyzed it, demonstrated that a fraction of that material is indeed from outside the solar system based on the chemical composition, isotopes, and so forth. So we can do that analysis as long as the government will work with us. And I hope that the future will allow us to figure out what these things are. We must stay curious. That's the important point. We should not dismiss it or ridicule it, but instead take it seriously and figure it out the scientific way. And, you know, if we do find that any object is extraterrestrial beyond a reasonable doubt, I will not waste time going to Stockholm for the Nobel Prize ceremony, because I will have much more important matters to attend to, which is to attend to the implications of such a discovery. You know, who cares about an award given by humans to humans if you're encountering alien technology? It's more important than artificial intelligence in terms of shaping our future, because artificial intelligence is based on the training data set limited to this Earth, whereas alien technology is based on a training data set beyond this Earth. There is much more real estate beyond this Earth, and we don't know much about it.
Well, Avi, you yourself say that most of these cases, at least in these files, are probably human-made, that they are from Earth. It sounds like you're holding out a lot of hope that there may be a discovery from beyond this Earth. Why are you so hopeful? Why, despite your own assessment, are you really holding out this hope that something extraterrestrial will be found?
Oh, for a variety of reasons. First, you know, I don't, when I follow geopolitics, I don't find a lot of intelligence in the way that humans behave on this Earth. And so I'm hoping for a higher level of intelligence from space. But also, you know, when I was younger, before I met my wife, I used to go on blind dates, and my hope was always to aim high rather than low. And my colleagues in the astronomy community are obsessed with searching for microbes. You know, these are the most common forms of life that you may find out there. But if you go on a date, obviously you can aim at the most mediocre dating partners. I mean, and you can marry the first one that you meet. But my objective is to find someone who is more intelligent than we are, because this way we can learn something new from that experience. So I would advocate for, instead of allocating all the research funds the way that the astronomy community is doing right now to the search for microbes, I would allocate comparable levels of funding, billions of dollars, also to the search for technological signatures in the form of objects that arrive into the solar system from outside. Just because we didn't do that, and maybe there is something out there. And I'm hopeful because, you know, originally Enrico Fermi asked the question, where is everybody? And if I happened to be next to him when he was asking this question, you know, he asked it 12 years before I was born. But if I was there, I would put my arm around his shoulder and say, Enrico, don't be so presumptuous. You're not that attractive. You know, this is a question that every lonely person asks. Where is my dating partner? And the answer is, you have to search for it. You have to build a telescope. You have to look around. You can't just ask this question and hope that the partner will show up in front of you. And Enrico didn't build any telescope. So my point is, without searching, we will not find anything. And when we do search, when we go on dates, we have to be hopeful that our dating partner might be more intelligent than we are. Because if we always focus on mediocre dating partners like microbes, we might miss the opportunity to learn from someone who is better than us.
Professor Avi Loeb, thank you so much for talking to me, and good luck finding more intelligent life out there.
I'm doing my best. I found my wife, but maybe there is something even better in the universe at large. I don't know. We will see.
Thanks, Avi Loeb. What do you think? Do the videos show objects from this planet or beyond? Let us know in the comments. And if you like this video, please hit the like button. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe.